Hey, I'm Frank. Welcome back to the Frank Road Show. I'm out from behind the paywall at Policy Matters USA. I got the talk show bug when I was a contributor on Fox Business News for a couple of years, and when I had my own radio show in Raleigh, North Carolina. While I once had a face for TV, now that I'm an old man, radio or audio is better for you. But really, yeah, it's my camera that's broken. Yeah, that's it. It's not that I'm an old man. Yeah, my camera's broken. Anyway, checking on some hot topics today. My hot topics today, I got President Biden, housing, and the Fed. The first hot topic today is Ukraine, Russia. It's a hot topic every day, of course, and it has been for over a year now. It certainly has the attention of the president and many, many Americans for obvious reasons. President Biden is on his way to a NATO meeting in Lithuania, stopped off in the UK to speak with Prime Minister Sunak and meet newly crowned King Charles. President Biden has not been very friendly with the UK for the past couple of years since he was president. He's always favored Ireland over the UK, and he's made it pretty obvious as a president that he's not a big fan of the UK. Anyway, trying to mend that relationship a little bit. And he's emphasizing, and I have my air quotes up, the special relationship between the US and the UK. What does the UK bring to the table these days? The Bank of England and some military support. But the UK military is a joke today. The only reason the UK military or the UK military industrial complex is anything of any meaning or needs to be paid attention to is because in the 1990s during the Clinton administration, when the UK was shown to be, or most of Europe was shown to be ineffectual militarily during the Kosovo War, in the breakup of Yugoslavia, President Biden and members of Congress allowed the UK and many other NATO countries to go ahead and buy up US military assets, military production assets. So factories, US corporations that provided arms and equipment. And only for that reason is the UK still relevant when it comes to the military issues around the world. And then, of course, just the Bank of England, the historic power the Bank of England has had and it continues to have. The key issue for President's trip is Russia-Ukraine. There's a lot to be sorted out. Most importantly, the president's renewed interest in providing ammunition to Ukraine, and in particular cluster munitions, which have largely thought to be illegal. Russia's using them in Ukraine. America has disavowed them. But as the president mistakenly said on live TV just this past week, we are running low on ammunition, we being the US, and of course, Ukraine is running low on ammunition. Not a thing that the president should be spouting in public. We have the real risk of having to go to war direct with Russia, and we know that China is going to invade Taiwan any year now, any time now, and we're going to need to battle China. So anyway, the president revealed that reality. And so in the midst of this ammunition shortage, we're going to use stockpiles of cluster munitions, cluster bombs to provide to Ukraine to help their efforts in their counteroffensive against Russia in the Donbass, Luhansk, Kherson, and Crimea. The counteroffensive from Ukraine is not going as expected in terms of speed. Ukraine is still challenged by its lack of adequate aviation, and of course, the imbalance between the resources of Ukraine and Russia. Having said that, of course, Ukraine is the largest military budget in Europe as a result of support from NATO and primarily from the United States. When it comes to contributions to the effort, the US is leading the whole world in supporting Ukraine. If it were not for the U.S. support for Ukraine, this war would have been over already, and Russia would have achieved its goals. Estimates are hard to nail down, but it looks like something between 75 billion to 115 billion has already been allocated by the U.S. to Ukraine. 46.6 billion-ish or 50 billion-ish in direct military aid, 21 billion-ish in financial aid, 4 billion-ish in humanitarian aid. Congress has already appropriated 115 billion. Estimates from the Congressional Research Office suggest we've already spent about $75 billion, from the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, about $77 billion. Anyway, absent our contribution, and we are by far the largest contributor to support for Ukraine. Again, Europe is being embarrassed by the lack of ability to support their neighbor militarily or financially. And so the U.S. is doing its part, and more so. Right? Think of how we could use that money here domestically rather than sending over to Ukraine. And you can be assured that a lot of that military equipment and a good portion of that money is being skimmed off the top. Remember now, Ukraine is was one of the most corrupt nations in the world. It's not clear, that may have changed already, but there's real concerns and very little oversight for what's being sent over to Ukraine by the U.S. We're not sure what an exit strategy is yet. According to President Zelensky, when Russia is off their territory. So eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, Luhansk regions, when they have cleared the Kherson area, when they have evacuated Russia from Crimea. That is what the exit strategy is for Ukraine. But of course, that can't be the exit strategy. It's not likely that Ukraine can achieve that goal. And we have a debate in the United States between Republicans and Democrats whether we should be supporting this effort at all. But since we have already begun to support this effort since the very first day in February of 2022, it would be hard pressed to pull out. If the United States were to stop supporting Ukraine today with direct military aid and financial support, it'd be over. Russia would, in the next several months, run right over Ukraine and achieve their ultimate goal, which is the complete territorial takeover of Ukraine. As it is, given the U.S. support, Ukraine has really kept Russia to its initial gains from the early months of February 22 after their initial invasion of eastern and southern Ukraine and Crimea, which they achieved in 2014. So ask yourself, you're a policymaker in the United States, no more support for Ukraine. Can you handle the devastation that will be wreaked upon Ukraine? If we continue to support Ukraine more aggressively with more weapons, F-16s, more ammunition, longer range missiles, more intelligence, then we risk going into direct conflict with Russia. It seems like the middle ground is going to be negotiations. It seems like Ukraine is going to have to give up some territory in order to save the majority of its country. An awful solution for Ukraine. Ukraine has been devastated by Russia. Russia is a brutal wartime foe. Even having said that, Russia is, of course, getting their asses kicked on the ground. Ukraine has done a remarkable job taking on what was thought to be a powerful military, which turns out to be nothing. But because Russia has so much more man and material, they can keep throwing it into the fight. And because Putin and Russians don't have the same value on life and material as the West does, they keep throwing more and more at it and will continue to do so. It seems like negotiations are going to have to end this war, as most wars are ended with negotiations. All right, let's go ahead and move on to housing. A lot of angst out there in the housing market amongst analysts and buyers and increasingly sellers. The U.S. housing market is broken. We have commoditized housing in the United States. The sharing economy, Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking.com, the global reset put forth by the World Economic Forum that says people should own nothing. But of course, someone or something has to own everything. And so the game has been to allow hedge funds, private equity funds, large financial organizations, banks, to take on the ownership role so they can rent those housing assets to Americans. And millions of homes are being bought up by financial companies who have deep, deep pockets compared to an individual buyer in order to convert those homes into rental units. No one will own anything. Of course, we've had horrible Fed monetary policy since 2001 with zero interest rate policy and the quantitative easing policy. And we've had the boom in the flipping market. And it's wreaked havoc on our housing. And we have a shortage of housing increasingly as a result. Housing has become a commodity. Home appreciation, certainly since the early 2000s, have been off the charts. From 1970 to 1997, home prices were up 219% over that 30-year period, 27-year period. It's about 11% per year. It was skewed a little bit to the high side by the go-go days of the recovering 1980s. In the 10-year period from 1997 to 07, prices were up 88%, 9% per year. From 2012 to 2023, up 965%. Stunning, unsustainable. And from 2020 to 2023, home prices are up 33%. These are unsustainable valuations. This is bad news for our economy. For owners, of course, happy days. Who loves inflation? Homeowners. The commoditization of the housing market has worked for some. It's worked for sellers. It's worked for financial companies. It's worked for flippers. For buyers, for the 20 or 30 somethings, no, not good. They can't climb the wall. In fact, one of the motivations behind the student loan forgiveness idea is to provide more liquidity to low income and middle income and young households so that they can begin to get on the housing ladder. Under the premise, of course, housing prices will keep going up. But this is not good. The housing market in the US is breaking into a high-end and low-end market, with the middle end being taken out because we're not really producing any mid-level homes anymore or low-income homes. Of course, analysts are starting to note the Fed rate hikes of the past year, which are not yet completed, is hurting housing. Well, yeah, that's how it works. Higher interest rates, less borrowing, that's how it works when you're trying to slow down the economy to reduce inflationary prices and pressures, reduce the money supply, raise interest rates, reduce consumer borrowing, reduce gross domestic private investment. This is the mechanism through which you reduce inflation. There's no alternative. So yeah, housing is going to take a hit. And yeah, home prices are going to fall. And yeah, that's going to be okay. Now, the Federal Reserve has engendered a whole bunch of bubbles, and the housing market is just one of them. And they continue to boost the housing market with their micromanagement of the economy related to shocks. Of course, our most recent shock was the banking shock that took place with Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic, and I'm forgetting the other one. Was it Sovereign Bank? But the Fed has created this through bad monetary policy, through free money, through zero interest rates. And we can see it on the charts. A lot of variables in the housing market right now that need to go away in order to make housing, which should not be a commodity, affordable and available to as many Americans as possible. Not through renting, but through ownership. We need to fix this. No one's talking about it at the policy level, but it needs to be addressed. And it's going to have to involve corrections. That's it for me today. Always try to buy American.